Yes, it's OTB AM. It's Friday morning. Hope you enjoyed that chat with John Giles there. Really interesting stuff on John about his all-time Leeds 11. Maybe some surprising calls in there. Owen Shane, good morning to you.
Very good morning, Adrian. How are things?
Sweaty palms on. Won't lie to you. No, not normally that nervous sort of coming on here on a Friday morning. Take it in our stride, don't we? Like it's, a few guests on, talk about the sport, let people know what's happening in the newspapers, a few comments. Pretty straightforward. But sweaty palms this morning, Owen.
Very rarely do you have to represent your county like you're representing them this morning.
Yeah, it does feel as if, it's sort of the morning of heading off to Croke Park. You'll be all too familiar with this, and I won't be all that familiar with it at all. Other than back in the day, in the mid-2000s, when Westmeath actually had a decent team and should have got way further than they did. They really should have got way further than they did. There was such a sense of that at the time, and with every passing year and every passing opportunity to make any kind of replication of how good we were at that time and how far we advanced for various reasons, including Dublin's dominance. Obviously, you will be familiar with that. Yeah, just sort of you grieve for the days that where the sun was high on and the football was good.
You'd almost take recent Westmeath, would you, at this point, given what's happening in the world?
I mean, look, yes, of course, I'd love to see some sport, but I mean, this is more of a lament for
Would you not say Westmeath, like, who puts their hand up in terms of the Leinster counties who would win the Leinster Championship without Dublin's existence over the last decade?
Well,
last 9 years. I'm sure you'd make the case that Westmeath would have been in contention.
I have often said that there are two teams dominating Leinster at the minute over the last decade, and that is Dublin and Westmeath. And obviously, there's a bit of a joke in that, but also at the same time, for a lot of those years, I would say that Westmeath would have been in with a serious shot. But I mean, it's fairly futile, isn't it? Like, who would win the league if Manchester City weren't there? If Liverpool weren't there this season, who would win the league? It just feels slightly redundant. Kildare would have had a shout for that. Maybe Meath, average enough team at the best of times on. And outside of that, it's slim pickings. But it's the same. Sure, it's been the same, and the margins have been less, but it's been the same on the national stage over the last 5 or 6 years, obviously. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, and it's not even. It's an interesting question from you because you're just looking at it in terms of silverware. Even in 2004 from us, it was much more than silverware. You and your mates and your family get the opportunity every single year to travel to lots of high-profile games, to get up to Croke Park, to share in something that is impossible to replicate anywhere else. Consider the levels of emotion you get to, whether it's the nervousness, the highs, the lows, but that shared experience is so unfamiliar and people from Kerry and Dublin to a lesser degree, because they would have gone through, obviously, the troughs over the years as well, and various other counties, Galway, Armagh, Tyrone, various other counties will have no idea of this, but it's not something that you experience. It's you get the odd, you get thrown a bone here or there, and you get a day out at Croke Park that you're ultimately going up to get the shit kicked out of you. And so there's a bit of a falseness to it anyway, because you don't get that deep nervous energy because you're going to play Dublin and you're going to get killed. But yeah, so that's not something, you're living a very different experience to most of the rest of us when it comes to that shared experience of sport.
Privileged, I think, is the word. But where were you for the summer of 2004? What's your memory? Obviously, we're talking about the Westmeath Mount Rushmore for anybody who isn't already aware. And Adrian, with the company of Conor Moore, will be picking his four faces later on after 9 o'clock. I presume, there was obviously going to be somebody from the 04 team in your Mount Rushmore, but I presume that's your strongest memory of being a Westmeath man in the sporting sense.
Yeah, it was class. It was such a perfect time for me. I was in my mid-20s at that point, living in Dublin. Could not have been better. In fact, living just up the road from Croke Park in Phibsborough, it just really couldn't be better. I don't remember anything other than it was scorching hot every single day. We would have myself and a bunch of my mates from home. There'd be 6 of us that would still be very close, who've known each other since we were about 4. Would have in the main all gathered for those games. And gone into Croke Park. We would have gone for pints around. We would have met with our old schoolmates. You would see old neighbours, old school friends, family. You would just bump into people that you hadn't seen for years in the mill around Crow Park. And again, this is something that you're very familiar with. Like, I didn't really experience very much of that outside of the odd, as I said, the odd bone you get thrown since 2004. But it was just incredible. And the journey of it, the rivalry with Laois, obviously, over those years was just like an incredible thing. I was watching back. The GAA are doing that rewind series. I'm sure you've seen that over the last little while. And to be fair to them, they are putting a focus on a lot of the maybe lesser known counties. And they picked out my two Westmeath highlights, which was the 2004 final and then the 2015 game against Meath, which was
that was unbelievable.
Well, it runs to. I'm not. This is going to sound like some sort of hyperbole, but it definitely runs 2004 very close. Like, I was at that game.
It has to. Like, it's one of the. It's definitely the comeback of the decade in Gaelic football. It was
incredible. It was just incredible. And like, the context is the rivalry against Meath. Obviously, the context for me is I was sat at the game with my wife, who's from Navan. And at halftime, obviously, had just wrote the game off. Was like, listen, you know that point of the game on that you get to. Maybe you're not all that familiar with it, where you get to where you have made peace with the fact that you're going to get beaten, right? So you remove the emotion from it. That sort of nervous tension is gone almost, because you're like, right, actually, listen, we're just going to get beaten here, and that's just the way it is. And I've now removed myself from this idea of potentially beating a team like Meath, who, like, I was sat behind Desi Dolan when he took that free again in the early to mid 2000s. That was like an absolute gimme, and he kicked it past the post. It would have been the first time we'd ever beaten Meath in the championship, and that was such heartbreak. Like, that was maybe the most devastating day of my sporting existence. But 2015 was just sensational. The manner of it as well, like, Westmeath were coming and coming and coming, and they buried Meath's faces into the sand and stomped on them. And like, the icing on the cake, the goalkeeper getting sent off late on, that Heslin goal late on. Kieran Martin was like a bull, a beautiful bull. I described him on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely outrageous stuff. Like, and it was the fact that we were beaten and Meath were going around, they almost had the collars up. They were like, the arrogance of them all, absolute arrogance of them, and we managed to like drive their faces into the muck. It was sweet, one of the sweetest days.
In one of those moments, you're kind of almost fantasizing to yourself, "Oh, we get 2 goals here," and then a long ball goes in, and we get the next point after that, and I don't know, our backs get on top. You start justifying it in your head when you're that far behind, and it's just this 100%, fantastical notion until it actually happens. It's
I wasn't even, the reality is, honestly, I wasn't even thinking like that. I wasn't thinking, if we could get a couple, because I knew, as far as I was concerned, I knew at the time that was just fantasy. Like, I'm kidding myself here. Meath are all over us. We can't score. We've no momentum. They're playing with a bit of a swagger. We were maybe 7 or 8 points down at halftime. Just could not see it. But I honestly, Kieran Martin, and he's not a guy that gets talked about in conversations like these in relation to Westmeath's Mount Rushmore. But Jesus, that day he was unbeatable. He was unreal, and Heslin as well, obviously.
Yeah. Speaking of that man, John Heslin, we've been trying to gauge the thoughts of as many people as possible around our Mount Rushmore debates. So we called up John Heslin to get his thoughts on today's Mount Rushmore.
Hi lads, John Heslin here. I hope all is well during the current restrictions. Looking forward to seeing who Conor has to suggest as his sporting legends. I think many would join me in saying Desi Dolan would be my number one. Obviously grew up watching Desi play, and then luckily enough got to play with him and room with Desi. Taught me many tricks, including getting to the hotel room first and stealing all the biscuits. So learned plenty of tricks off Desi. I think Desi would agree that Ger Heaven probably taught him a lot, so Ger deserves a special shout out. For me though, of course, many of the 2004 team, Rory O'Connell, Gary Connaughton, all the lads, one special shout out again would be to John Kane. I think a lot of lads would say that he was the toughest opponent that they would have come up against. Obviously the forward bias in me then would give a special shout out to Dennis Glennon. Again, luckily enough got to play with him, and speed that I could only dream of having, so Dennis definitely deserves a special shout out. An unsung hero probably would be Kieran Gavin, an excellent player of the game and still playing to this day, and to captain a Sigerson winning team in DCU with the likes of Michael Murphy, Paul Flynn, a star-studded DCU team is definitely a credit to Kieran. And then not forgetting the ladies' sports as well. I'd have to give a special shout out to Pamela Greville for all that she's achieved in the game. It's really admirable, and they're kind of the people that I'd look up to, specifically from a GAA background in Westmeath.
Yeah, like John Heslin himself obviously is bloody hell. How do you not have when you're having a conversation like this, not include somebody like that? Incredible player. Lots of. It's funny. I'm not being facetious when I talk about the sweaty palms, and like it was Jesus. To be honest, I know your one is going to come at some point. Have you any idea yet about when Kerry gets shoved up to the front?
After the June bank holiday, I think.
Right.
That's the current. So sometime in the month of June when the sun really is splitting the rocks and we're still indoors.
Yeah, I've been at this for a couple of weeks, and I've been in contact with a bunch of people to make sure that I don't leave this list with people off the list on, as has happened in previous. I won't name them, but it's happened in previous elections. You got to be thorough about it, and I really enjoyed it. I have to say, really enjoyed the whole process of just going through it and like learning about people that you wouldn't have known very much about, and reminding yourself about the greatness of some of the Westmeath sports people that have come through. And there's been plenty of contacts as well. Jimmy Allen's been in contact lots. He's been thinking about this one as deeply as I have. He's suggesting that Conor Moore is going to put Spike Fagan in. Oh Lord, he says. Well, Spike is definitely one of those names that deserves to be in a conversation like this. Cormac McCormick says, out of that list, Desi Dolan, David Kilcoyne, Turlock O'Connor and Willie Lowry would be his four there. Desi nailed on, says Kieran Murr on Twitter. Robbie Henshaw, then Rory O'Connell, says, and he also wants to put his own brother in there, who is Fergal Murray. I mean, I think Fergal Murray is one of those players with a lot of medals, which is not a regular thing in Westmeath. Desi, Keane, Henshaw, and Eddie O'Leary, says Paul Leonard. Like, I don't know where we sit on the inclusion of horse owners / trainers on.
It depends what your view is on horse racing. Does the horse do the work? Does the trainer do the work? Does the jockey do the work? It's all three is the answer. It wasn't what was the name of the American horse that got nominated for Sports Illustrated Sports Person of the Year? Like, once that happened, the floodgates were open. Really, all three really can play a part in this.
Yeah. We've had a bunch of other contacts in as well. We've had Adrian O'Sullivan saying Brendan Murtagh has to be in with a shout. Most shinty appearances for Ireland. Was once the only non-Kilkenny player in the Leinster forward line when they won the Railway Cup. Bag county medals. The GOAT, he says. And he's agreed with there by Kevin O'Brien. And some current and former inter-county players have been in contact, apart from John Heslin as well. We have had an anonymous text in saying we'll be listening to the Westmeath Mount Rushmore tomorrow on the way to work. If the list isn't as follows, I'm going to want an explanation. John Evan, Robbie Henshaw, Desi Dolan and David Kilcoyne, with honourable mentions to John Jobber McGrath, Spike Fagan, Gary Connaughton, John Keane, Rory O'Connell, David O'Shaughnessy, Brezzy, Kenny Lyons, who was a name that I hadn't, it was the first suggestion I'd heard, Kenny Lyons, former Westmeath forward with a bit of a cut of style about him. John Joe Joyce, he says, and maybe mistaking him for another legendary John Joe, and Michael O'Leary in there as well. John Egan, the Westmeath footballer, says Alan Sheehan, who's obviously an Irish footballer who has had a long career in the English game. Rick and Ellen backs that up. He says with the level of soccer with the level that soccer is played at and what it takes to get to the top level, he's the best sportsman to ever come out of Westmeath. Like, it's a big shout, and not necessarily a shout I have to say that I would agree with. He's had certainly a long and like extremely good career. One of the very small percentage to manage to do so. John Kennellan says, not to mention if he stuck around, he would have been Westmeath's greatest ever GAA footballer. We shall never know. Michelle Whelan says, Alan Sheehan, Desi Dolan, Robbie Henshaw. She says, all three from Coosan. With something in the water here. And she's adding in Mark Rowan as well as the final name on that list. And Maris College on Twitter, great school on. One of the finest schools, tremendous school, greatest school in the country, says 5 former Maris GAA stars up for nomination for the off-the-ball Westmeath Sporting Mount Rushmore. Who would be the 4 that make up the Mars GAA Mount Rushmore? Well, there is a list that we might have to say for another day. In fact, when we're done with the off-the-ball Mount Rushmores, we might have to get back after July. We might have to start in like a school's Mount Rushmore.
That was Robbie Henshaw's school, wasn't it?
Yeah, Robbie Henshaw, Rory O'Connell, Desi Dolan, I think, went there. Mark Rowan definitely went there.
Does Robbie Henshaw make the GAA Mount Rushmore of that school?
Yeah, played in the Leinster final for Maris College. So you would have to say yes. Like at that point, he's probably leaning towards rugby at that stage, but probably in the balance and a fine Gaelic footballer who, again, no more than the Alan Sheehan point, would have gone on to have had a stellar career for Westmeath, you would think.
It was a great moment for your province and all that, seeing a Connacht man represent Connacht in the Pro 12 and bring that title home.
He's not from Connacht, though. That is a slight fly in the ointment of your bullshit theory there that I know you're just giving to wind me up. Right, well, we'll wrap up the Mount Rushmore talk then for the minute. We've lots more to come on that, and that's coming your way after 9 o'clock this morning, so do stay tuned for that. And if you have any thoughts on it as well, do get your comments coming in. By the way, I remember Paddy O'Shea being the Westmeath manager, says Cavan lad, who I'm assuming by that suggestion, because we haven't even mentioned him on, is putting Paddy up there. You giving to us?
No, not a chance. Like, absolutely hands off. Like, fair enough if it's like idle conversation back in 2018, which I think was the last time we did your Mount Rushmore. This is competitive dog eat dog when we're doing county by county here. Not a chance are you taking away and scurrying around the country to try and steal people off other counties.
Listen, we'll put them in. We'll put them in on. We're happy with that. Here's a bit of a sense of what's going on before we tell you what's happening in the back pages in the world of sport today. The Premier League star Sergio Aguero is saying that he's scared about returning to play football during the coronavirus pandemic. Aguero was speaking ahead of the meeting of the 20 Premier League clubs today. Again, obviously a Zoom call or video call, whatever the hell it is they use to examine plans to restart the season. It's been put on ice, obviously, since March. The league hoping to resume on June the 8th. With training starting on May the 18th. Obviously, plenty of obstacles and a lot of disquiet and objections from clubs about playing matches at neutral venues as well. And obviously, it will need the backing of the British government. But such a high-profile name coming out to say that players are scared about getting back to even training. I'm sure will come up for discussion as well. Today, League of Ireland clubs set to be updated on the finances required to stage matches behind closed doors in the summer. If government permits, of course, that move, players may be given the choice to opt out of playing games on safety grounds, which is an interesting dynamic. And in rugby, the Irish Daily Mail reporting that Leinster are set to be crowned the Pro14 champions when the season's eventually cancelled. The province were runaway leaders in their conference. As things stood, it's believed that the GAA could be facing a deficit of up to €15 million if there are no inter-county championship matches played in this calendar year. Employees, it's reported this morning, could be facing further pay cuts in May and June, with the GAA warning that it's unlikely to be a significant programme of games this year. So that's what's happening on that front. Here's a bit of a flavour of what's happening over the course of this morning for you. We're going to get stuck into the sports pages in just a moment's time, let you know exactly what's happening around those stories today. And as I mentioned a little earlier, it isn't just speculation about times. There's some other stories in there as well. Neil Tracy, as you'll have heard, there was a lot of contention about this one. Selected his Irish Rugby Professional 15, his selection during the week, and there was a lot of controversy about it. It, as you would expect, falls along provincial lines, and Alan Quinlan is going to be coming away about 8:30 or a little bit just afterwards, where he's going to give us his thoughts on that. Will he be putting all those Munster players back in? We shall find out. Padraig Mannion is taking part in the FIFA 20 All-Ireland charity tournament this weekend. It all kicks off today. It's been live streamed. He's going to be representing Galway. We'll find out just how good he is at FIFA, get his thoughts as well, and a couple of those GAA stories doing the rounds this week as well. And we've got Westmeath's Mount Rushmore coming for you just after 9 o'clock on the crappy quiz at 20 to 10. I lost my crown last week. Can I regain it this week? I'll be in the company. I'm sure it'll be a pleasant exercise, and everybody will be very collegiate about it, and the quizmaster will be under no pressure whatsoever from a bunch of screaming kids. So that is coming your way at the way it normally works on, isn't
it? Yeah. I would like to say in advance that literally all of your children are actually less childish than you. Like we've got a lot of glimpses of kids over the last couple of weeks. They are all more mature than all of you. I'm talking about you, Ger, and Nathan. We would have a more mature conversation with your children by just asking them trivia than asking the three of you guys.
It's fair. We did shoot this yesterday, and I was more than slightly distracted by having to mind two kids at the same time. So I mean, whether
excuses in early.
Yeah, listen, excuses in late, as it turns out. So anyway, look, that's what's happening over the course of this morning. We're going to be getting to Alan Quinlan next here on OTB AM to hear his best ever Irish Rugby 15 of the professional era. First, we're going to give you a chance and a heads up that you're going to have the chance to relive another Heineken Cup tournament classic. Cardiff Blues and Leicester Tigers played out a thrilling semi-final in the 2008-09 season to determine who would head to Edinburgh, of course, for the final there. Martin Williams is going to be looking back on that match too. It's going to be streamed tomorrow at 5:45 Irish time as well. So all that coming your way in just a little bit. And a reminder as well that we're going to have another OTB Kids takeover coming your way in just a few moments' time. A few days' time. It's coming your way next week. And Simon Zebo is going to be the subject of it. We've had Lee Keegan, you'll remember Brian O'Driscoll as well, and getting all the hard questions put to them. And you can get in touch. If you want to drop us a WhatsApp, it's a 0879 180 180. And you can get your kid to send us through a WhatsApp there, a little video message, and we'll put it to Simon Zebo. Right, it is time now for the newspapers.
OTB AM.
Going to start with offtheball.com, and you would have heard if you were tuned in from 7:30 this morning, John Giles select his Leeds 11 of all time. It's the lead story on our website this morning, as well as his tribute to his former teammate Trevor Cherry, who was announced this week had passed away as well. So very sad stuff there, and very tough for John, it has to be said, following very quickly, obviously, on the passing of another former teammate, Norman Hunter. Also up on offtheball.com this morning, Richie McCormack on the return of NASCAR, and how this is going to be the first sport that gets back in your screens. I'm not sure I could bring myself to it. I have to say, Ricky Bobby is about the extent of my exposure to NASCAR. I mean, I might go for it. It'll probably be on at all hours of the morning as well here, which might sort of deter people from looking at it. But how desperate are you? I see there's live chess somewhere. Seems to be the only actual sport that's happening. I'm really not sure I could bring myself to it.
No, I'd almost be more inclined to do the chess than the NASCAR, to be honest with you. Not an organisation I'm particularly fond of, or I would take a lot of other things over NASCAR at this point, I think.
Yeah, you got the Indo first?
I do, and the headline here, I should actually start with the photograph in the back of the Irish Independent. It's a photograph there of Michael Verney, who completed the 1,000 push-up challenge. We know on this show what an unbelievable achievement that is. Verney completes charity challenge. Our own Michael Verney is used to writing the news instead of making it, but the Irish Independent journalist completed a notable achievement of his own last night of 1,000 push-ups in 1 hour, and all for some great causes. Fair play to him. The fundraiser collected over €14,000 for PPE for HSE staff, and of course for Do It for Dan. So fair play to Michael Verney there. That's him, obviously, at the end after the 1,000th push-up. No games will leave Croker facing €15 million black hole is the main story. Stark figures given to county treasurers as more salary deferrals are sought from staff. An opt-out clause is being discussed for League of Ireland players. Meanwhile, the players won't be forced to take part in matches if they feel themselves their well-being and their safety won't be of the highest priority, or if they feel that they won't be safe getting on to the pitch. And then a couple of other stories here from the Irish Independent this morning. You've got a beacon in the darkest days, moments in time, writes Vincent Hogan. Rip it up and start again, says Niall Morgan. Tyrone Star would love to see a return to knockout football this year. And Italia 90, in his own words, ahead of the repeat of Ireland against England, which is on TG Cahir tonight. We recall Kevin Moran's diary, which appeared in the Irish Independent on the morning of the match on June 11th, 1990. That game, of course, was the focus of our Classic Game Club this week on OTB AM.
Surely John Haslam, by the way, should be on any Westmeath Mount Rushmore. Surely to Jesus, says David Connolly, which is a fantastic expression. And Michael Bannon rightly pointing out that Desi Dolan didn't go to Mars, he went to Mells and Longford. So there you are. The Irish Examiner for you this morning, John Fogarty, reports about countless still counting the cost of counties still counting the cost of cancellations. He writes here, Galway looking for a €25,000 rebate from Aer Lingus for cancelled flights to New York. Roscommon looking for half that for their cancelled trip to London. It seems like Galway's trip, which wasn't back due to be this weekend, of course, would have topped over 60 grand in total. And there's been a lot of conversation over the last week, and indeed more than that, about the potential rebate, which a decision on which it seems will come from the EU, but a potential rebate there, whether it's going to be in hard cash, or are you going to get vouchers? Like, I think from a county board point of view, they'd probably want to get the cash in the short term in terms of like keeping the cash flow going where it needs to, but like in terms of a longer term thing, can't see vouchers being an issue. They're going to have to spend that money at some point anyway down the track to get themselves to wherever it is. But maybe in the short term they need the cash. We'll see. That's a decision that I'm sure will be taken out of their hands. Stephen Barry on that Ray Walker case and how it's the first showing of Meldonium in Irish sport as well. Ray Walker saying that he doesn't know how it got into his system, and obviously denying any wrongdoing around it. But this is one that's set to run and run and run, because we don't, I suppose, have enough conversations about doping in Irish sport and the possibility of doping in Irish sport. And obviously, when we see a case like this, it's an opportunity for us to speak to people who are involved in it about their sense of whether it's an issue or not. And Owen Cormacan, finally from the Irish Examiner for me, with the Cork hurling manager Kieran Kingston this morning, where you can see pictured there. And I suppose, to summarise it, hoping upon hope that we get a return to sport at some stage, but as tends to be the case as well, obviously saying that just as long as everything is safe to do so.
The Irish Times this morning leads with Sean Moran's piece about the GAA. The GAA announced further staff pay cuts. Association facing serious financial predicament due to coronavirus crisis. A couple of other interesting stories here as well in the Irish Times today. Ian O'Riordan asking about the Ray Walker case and how the situation presents more questions. How Meldonium ended up in player system will not be clarified, and it is a question that we all still have at the moment. Johnny Waterson, meanwhile, with the headline here, Cronin's ban leaves Munster facing vexed questions. He's gone back on the James Cronin situation, the story which came out last week, and St. Joseph's unwilling to give up dreams of glory. It's Eamon Donoghue this morning focusing on college's GAA and how their manager of St. Joseph's is hopeful that Leinster final against Naas will eventually be played.
The Times UK edition, the London Times, the photo that you can see here first, Britain's Olympic swimming champion Adam Peaty has had a pool lowered into his back garden on. This is incredible stuff. I've seen one swimmer whose name escapes me over the last 24 hours who had a tension rope. They'd built something similar. They'd got a skip. They'd put it in their back garden. They'd put some sort of bin liner around it. I'm sure it's something a bit more industrial than that, and put a tension rope around their waist so that they could obviously manage to knock out whatever sort of modified training that was possible. But Adam Peaty has gone a step further, and he's got a pool lowered into his back garden, and it's 5 meters long. You can see him in full flight there. How many of those full flight strokes he manages to actually knock out in one length, I really don't know. But I mean, obviously athletes are willing to go to whatever lengths it takes to, pardon the pun, to get a bit of training done. Tension, some interesting stuff in the London Times this morning. Tension between UK anti-doping and UK athletics over Alberto Salazar and Mo Farah again, according to Matt Lawton here. UK athletics handed over a report last night that UCAD say should have been handed over in 2015. It contains information about Farah's medical history. UCAD are not happy. I'm wondering, why it takes so long. The report was finished in 2015 to eventually hand the thing over. We don't get any indication, certainly from the first page, exactly about what's exactly contained within and any great salaciousness in relation to that. But certainly there are major question marks to be asked. And I know there's been changes at the top of UK athletics over the last little while, but we're going back 5 years here, and as to why it takes so long for that report to be handed over is just incredible. And it's A relationship that has had plenty of question marks about it over the last while, and this certainly does not. I think in any of these cases, what you'd like to see is transparency and openness. And again, it's another check in the box of neither of those factors. And also, D-Day for Project Restart by Matt Lawton, Martin Hardy and Gary Jacob here. It seems that next Thursday there's going to be a vote by Premier League clubs on the planned return to games on June the 8th. There are 92 games remaining to be played in the season. Some talk I've seen here about keeping match locations as neutral venues and keeping them quiet from fans so the fans don't show up, which is, I think, quite a fanciful notion, if I'm being honest, and introducing another... I mean, maybe it's what they have to do, but it's another layer of intrigue.
The Herald this morning leads with pool title on the line. Reds reject claim that plan to restart league is farcical. The loggerheads, really, the football club with the mayor of Liverpool, it seems, at this point. GAA faces €15 million loss this year, as already mentioned. And greatest Dublin sporting events. Today in the Herald, it's number 6, Republic of Ireland versus Brazil in 1987.
The Irish Daily Mail, you can see the UK version there. Aguero, we're scared, obviously, in front of those comments that we mentioned a bit earlier on. On the Irish version, Rory Keane and Chris Foy write that Leinster are going to be handed the Pro14 title once the tournament is officially cancelled. Michael Clifford on those latest round of wage cuts at the GAA as playing hopes recede, he says, as well as that Aguero story, the quote being that the majority of players are scared because they have family, they have children, babies, parents. That's the Irish Daily Mail this morning.
The back page this morning of the Irish Daily Star is that Sergio Aguero story. We're scared, he says. Aguero says players have fears over restarting. Niall Quinn, meanwhile, says leagues must be ready to go. Six Nations, France tie, a big doubt, writes Derek Foley. So this is obviously the postponed Six Nations game that was due to take place in Paris around Paddy's Day. The fixture itself is in grave danger, along with the rest of this year's outstanding matches, including the clash with Italy, of being declared totally void. You've got a photo inset there on the back of the Times, which says, meanwhile in Nicaragua, one of the leagues, which is still proceeding at the moment. Those are the players of Deportivo Walter Ferretti, celebrating a goal against Managua FC in the Liga Primera in Nicaragua in the early hours of yesterday morning. So it might have been, was it Belarus? Was it last month that still had games going? You want to focus your attention on Nicaragua now if you want some football. And neutral grounds, a no-go. Premier League clubs are opposed to playing at neutral venues to get the season finished.
The Irish Sun, meanwhile, is probably the UK version that you can see in front of you there, but the Irish version, Neil O'Riordan has an exclusive that the FAI High Performance Director, Ruth Doctor, looks set to stay at the association despite all the boardroom upheaval there over the last while. He joined in 2013, obviously under John Delaney, and with reduced terms, writes Neil O'Riordan, looks set to sign on for another term. Ian Hart, in an interview, reminds us that Robbie Keane, and we do need reminding, Robbie Keane's role with the FAI remains in limbo. We haven't had any update on that in the last while. And Martin Blackburn on those Sergio Aguero quotes about being fearful of a return to play.
Sergio Aguero leads the way on the back of the Mirror this morning. Players scared over return is the headline there. Clubs negative on neutral grounds plan. Meanwhile, as we've already mentioned, and Liverpool blast mayor over fans ending season. And associations set all-island steering body, writes Paul O'Hare. The FAI and IFA last night agreed to set up a steering group that will investigate the viability of an all-island league. So this is the story involving Kieran Lucid, who published his final recommendations last week. It's something that kind of went under the radar given everything that's going on. It would involve teams from the North and South playing out their own reduced domestic leagues to determine their respective champions and European positions. So that is something that is still chugging away at the moment. And GAA season, of course, hanging by a thread is the headline there with a photograph of an empty Croke Park, and empty it will probably stay for the foreseeable future.
The Guardian, interesting story here. David Heidner, Paul McKinney's have an exclusive that the Premier League are investing in COVID-19 testing machines. Apparently can turn around results in 2.5 hours, they say. They cost £36,000 each and are readily available. Now, there's a couple of kickers in this one. They can only test one person every 2.5 hours, which is 7 employees a day. And they're saying that the turnaround times and the delay and the costs is effectively why the NHS don't want them, because it's obviously one of the first questions you would ask yourself here. But this is obviously all. My first thought was about actually this is something that could test a lot of people over a very short period of time, that the health services may be able to make use of them in the shorter term. But it seems it's not really any of those things. It's just a method of, if we are to move towards behind closed door sport, that this would be some way to help that. That's the Guardian.
The Irish news, finally, for me this morning is a photograph of the gates at Anfield, venue concerns on the agenda, and then Aaron Kernan has been out in front of the media as well. Sport will have huge role in a return to normality. So he's done an interview there with the Irish news, kind of reiterating just how important the return to action will be for the well-being of the nation, as well as our own enjoyment, I guess, at this point. So talking sense as usual there.
And the last one from me this morning is the Telegraph. Aguero fears for family over restart. Cricket's new shiny thing, the 100, has been postponed. You won't be surprised to hear. And Gavin Mayer's saying that there's a plan for a reduced 18-team Heineken Champions Cup, reduced to 4 matches in the pool stages to get around the fixture congestion. Rog had been saying in the Examiner today that there was chat about expanding, in fact, the Heineken Cup next season, in terms of the number of teams at least partaking, obviously reducing the number of games. Because we won't have official qualifiers other than the current half-finished standings, particularly in the top 14. So slightly conflicting reports there, and it remains to be seen exactly how that plays out over the next while. Right, that is the newspapers for you this morning. Do keep in contact with us over the course of the day. Alan Quinlan is going to join us next this morning to choose his all-time Irish Rugby 15 of the professional area.